Good morning. I'd like to call to order this regular meeting of the Zoning and Planning Committee for Thursday, April 11th. My name is Jeremy Schrader, and I'm the chair of this committee. With me at the dais are Councilmember Ellison, Councilmember Reich, and Councilmember Gordon. Let the record reflect that we have a quorum. I'd like to start this meeting by welcoming Kimberly Helene as our new planning manager. I'm really looking forward to working closely with Kimberly on this committee's business. And also just want to take this opportunity to thank Jason Wittenberg for his years of service in this role. Jason will now lead our code development group, and I'm grateful for his leadership at this work. And at this time, I'd like to turn it over to Director Poor for a couple more words.
Thank you, Chairman. I just did want to acknowledge Jason's long service. He was recognized at the Planning Commission as well, where I think he was, I think it was 14 years of service at Planning Commission. And we're thrilled to have him working on our new section on the code development. He'll be working closely with this committee on implementing the comp plan and making other kind of streamlining and changes to our city ordinances. And then I want to acknowledge Kimberly, who's been with us 11 years. We're thrilled to have her taking over land use, and we look forward to seeing her regularly at ZMP. So with that, I thank the chair for recognizing Jason's contribution and welcoming Kimberly. Thank you.
Thanks so much. So we'll get back to the agenda. We've got 6 items on today's agenda, and we'll dispense with the consent agenda first. Item number 3 is a rezoning application submitted by Noah Eastman for the property located at 3811 Minnehaha Avenue. Item 4 is a rezoning application submitted by the Northeast Park Investment LLC for the property located at 1501 Johnson Street Northeast. Is there any discussion on these items, or would anyone like to pull it off for discussion? Seeing none, I'd like to move approval of the consent agenda. All those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed say no. The ayes have it, and the motion carries. We'll move on to the quasi-judicial hearing, a portion of the agenda. Item number 1 is the consideration of an appeal regarding the decision of the Zoning Board of Adjustments approving a variance to reduce the minimum off-street parking requirements for a child care center located at 2504 35th Avenue South. And we'll begin with the staff presentation.
Good morning, Chair Schrader and committee members. Before you today is an appeal of the decision of the Zoning Board of Adjustment granting a variance to reduce the off-street parking requirement for a child care center at 2504 35th Avenue South. The approved variance is to reduce the number of required spaces from 12 spaces to 8 spaces. 7 of those 8 spaces would be physically provided on site, while the 8th space would be provided via bicycle incentives. 2 additional drop-off spaces would be provided on street. The property is located at the intersection of West 25th and 35th Avenue South. It's located in the I-1 Light Industrial and the Industrial Living Overlay District. The home to the immediate south is a legal non-conforming residential use in the I-1, and the rest of the immediate area is zoned for residential uses, though there are some commercial uses located along 25th, including a child care center directly across the street. The northern half of the property is currently occupied by a vacant single-story building. Currently there is an existing unstriped parking area and a landscaped area to the south of the building. The applicant is proposing to remodel the existing building into a new child care center. The child care center would occupy both the main floor and the basement of the building. There would be a variety of site improvements proposed as part of the project, the 2 most notable being striping the existing parking area to provide the 7 spaces and the bike parking, and the installation of a playground space that would occupy much of the existing landscaped area. Staff recommended approval of the variance application based in part on the small size of the parcel and the difficulty in accommodating both the required parking as well as an appropriately sized outdoor play area for the daycare. Staff feels the applicant is utilizing as much of the site as is practical for parking given the conditions and the size and location of the building. Staff also noted that the variance facilitates the establishment of a use here and a productive use of the existing commercial building with a use that is more compatible with the surrounding area and character of the generally residential area than many other uses which could be permitted in the I-1 district. So the Board of Adjustment adopted staff findings and approved the variance with some fairly typical conditions. I believe the appellant is here to speak, and their statement is included in your packets. There are also some public comments in the packets. Staff is recommending that the committee deny the appeal and uphold the Board of Adjustment, and I'm happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm not seeing any questions.
Thanks.
At this point, I'll open up the public hearing, and I'll give the applicant the opportunity to speak to the committee. Would the applicant like to come up, or a representative come up? Sure. And if you could state your name and address for the record, please.
My name is Michael Turdan. I live at 2524 35th Avenue South. That's on the block where the proposed daycare center is, or will be. And a second ward resident and a member of the Seward Neighborhood Group Board. The appeal is primarily on the parking issue. The 25th Street has become a very, very busy area, and we don't think it's been reflected in the staff report. And the site is a tight site. If you went through the staff report, I don't believe you noticed how many kids are slated to be at that center. They're currently talking 169 children plus 20 to 30 staff. Across the street is another daycare that's been there for a year or more, and that has about 60 kids. So we're having the equivalent of a elementary school of about 230, 250 people and children at this site. The appeal is that you look at the parking and ask that they maybe attach some conditions to their parking, because the current situation, we believe, will create congestion. I'd like to yield some of my time to neighbors who are also adjacent.
No, we'll have time for public
Okay.
comment after that, but it will be limited to 2 minutes.
So that basically we're asking that the appeal be upheld and that conditions be attached if there are modifications that would result in granting a number of parking spaces, but how they're used.
Thank you very much. Next, I'd like to give the applicant the opportunity to address the committee. Is someone from the project here, or representative here to speak?
Good morning, Chairman, Committee. My name is Karina Zumba. I am the Chief Operating Officer for Darren Gonzaga. I've worked for Darren Gonzaga since it opened in 2013. Before coming to Tierra in 2013, I worked several years at another Spanish immersion daycare and preschool in Minneapolis. Having worked at and been the person responsible for opening for Minneapolis daycares, so we'll be the fifth, I have well over a decade experience in how Minneapolis daycare's traffic works, the impact on neighborhoods, and the parking needs of the center. First, I want to share that we have always worked hard to be a good neighbor and a positive community member, from sponsoring local 5Ks and collecting annual donations for the reach of youth to keeping 2 full-time staff to ensure our facilities are kept in the best condition. We are known for being a great neighbor. The Seward location is a foreclosed abandoned building that was left in despair. It is zoned industrial, so there are many types of businesses that could go in that space. And those businesses would most likely put a very large and sightly parking lot where we're putting a playground. We have talked to some of our neighbors and they have expressed to us that they do not want us to add more parking, that they appeal or parking variance to express their concerns about traffic and parking. We agree with neighbors, and we do not want to add more parking. Adding parking would be bad for everyone. It would negatively impact home values, as there will be a large parking lot next to homes instead of a playground and a premise fence. It will reduce the playground area that we are required by the state licensing to have, and it will be an unnecessary space. The appeal mentioned a few things that we want to address. First is the circumstances not created by the person presently having an interest in the property and are not based on economic considerations. This is a correct statement. A child care center is a permitted use in this zoning district, and therefore installing a playground for a child care center does follow the intent of a comprehensive plan. The appeal shares that the need for the playground area as presented is purely economic, which is not accurate. The playground size is not related to the number of children we're licensed for. SHU requires 70 square feet of outdoor area per child in the area. If we design a playground area large enough for all children old enough to play in the same time, we will be required to install an outdoor area more than 10,000 square feet. This is why all daycares in Minneapolis design playgrounds to be 3,000 to 6,000 square feet. This is large enough to accommodate 2 classrooms which take turns. This site has limited options for outdoor space, and the proposed playground area is just less than 3,000 square feet. It is not possible to put the playground equipment between the street and the building on the east side because of the floor radius required for equipment. It's too narrow. The state statute pertaining to require outdoor space, zoning ordinances, and current building on lot design were not within our control. Our proposed designs fulfills the intent of the zoning district while maintaining the character of the neighborhood. Neighbors of our Minneapolis centers have shared how happy they are to have us as a neighbor compared with other possible uses. Our centers are closed with the vast majority of people and at home evenings and weekends and have no impact on traffic then. During weekdays, our parking lot is often empty. The only time there's traffic is during drop-off and pickup, and we have submitted a limited time parking application for along our property lines for those specific periods of time, Monday to Friday. Our Wyndham location, which was mentioned in the previous meeting, has only 5 spaces, yet 50 more children and 50 more employees, which is less parking than we have at Seward. Yet we have not had a single neighbor or the city issues with traffic from our use. They have shared that they're grateful because the church took away much of their available street parking on weekends, and we do not take any. Therefore, in comparison to other possible businesses options going at this site, our impact is notably less. And according to our neighbors at our other Minneapolis locations, is not negative. Finally, I want to add that quality childcare is very hard to find in Minneapolis, particularly childcare that represents the values parents hold dear. Right now, we have over 300 families on our Minneapolis waiting list. Some might never get in on our program. With limited spaces available in Minneapolis, we ask that you grant our variance so that we can continue to offer Minneapolis families a high-quality option for their children's care. Thanks.
Thank you. Councilmember Gordon?
I wonder if I could ask a couple questions? And maybe we could just go back to the site plan that has the street parking. You mentioned that you were putting in 15-minute drop-off parking only signs.
Yes.
Could you just, I don't know if you can show us with the mouse, or maybe you can just explain. It looks like there's only a few near the corner here. Are you proposing to do more than that?
We are
Or requesting?
Yeah, the original plan for the parking, we're adding more parking spaces. I have.
Yeah, can I speak?
Yep, I'm going to let Pat
That's very helpful.
address
That's
that
fine.
question.
Yes,
Yeah.
my name is Pat Spangenberg. I'm the general contractor that will be assisting with this, and I've helped them build the other facilities, a few of them anyhow. This remodel in the space that you see here on the map and such for the parking stalls, there's actually, the backside of that building is in an alley. So you got 35th Avenue on one side and another Main Street on the other. There's not a lot of room between them 2 sides of the building at all. Off the alley coming in, you can see where she's got a trash enclosures that she'd like to include. There is a paved area right there behind the building that is fenced off directly right off the edge of the alley. So this has not changed. She might make that into playground area and continue and put up a nicer fence there to keep the children confined. But as you pull in, there's an access point right there right now. And there was probably I'm assuming there was about 5 or 6 parking stalls in that alley or in that area already, because this is already a paved area for access to that building. These 2 buildings is one, they called it 2 lots, but it's 1 building. It's bottom line. So technically, to make everything fit and to accommodate the handicap stalls, she's reconfigured it, kept everything on her property, and just made the adequate space for the playground area that you see in front of the parking, part of the existing property. So as far as I look at it, she's not interfering with anything new on the property other than bringing children to the area or taking care of child care. So that help?
Yeah, my question specifically was about on-street drop-off parking only. We got a letter from the Neighborhood Association yesterday that talked about adding more 15-minute only parking signs on-street for drop-off. And I was talking about how on the drawing here, we see that there's 2 designated drop-off parking
Okay.
spaces. Are you going to be requesting that you have more than 2?
I don't believe so. This is what you see is what we'd be proposing to my knowledge.
That's correct.
Okay, well, maybe we can talk more about that. It might be helpful if we increase that a little bit. I think that's what the neighborhood group was requesting too. I don't think we can put a condition about our right-of-way. We're going to have Public Works being very interested in what could be a condition and what couldn't, and maybe Andrew can answer that question about whether or not we can put a condition on the street parking. I think that's something we'd have to work out elsewhere.
Yeah, because the street parking is basically right of way, correct? I mean,
Right, so we control that already. We can't put a condition on you to do something to our
exactly.
space,
Okay, thank you.
is my feeling.
Councilmember Gordon, the 2 spaces that are shown on there, this is their most recent site plan that they submitted as part of their PDR. Those 2 spaces have not yet been approved by Public Works, and my understanding is that they probably would need to relocate those due to the bus stop that's there. But you could put a condition on the application requiring more designated off-street parking stalls. I don't think that we could recommend that they be in one particular spot on the street without Public Works' approval.
So we could designate an increase of on-street parking drop-off.
Yes, that is the case.
Okay,
Thank you.
I appreciate that. I had another question, if I may, Mr. Chair. Of course. And I think everybody probably saw the letter that we got yesterday from the neighborhood group with these 3 added conditions. The one was about coordinating or eliminating that bus stop. That's not a condition that we can really put on the applicant because that bus stop is Met Transit bus stop, and that's in our right-of-way as well, correct?
Chair Schrader, Councilmember Gordon, that is correct.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Next, I'd like to open the public hearing and give members of the public who would like an opportunity to speak. You'll have 2 minutes, and that time will be taken on the clock by the clerk. So if anybody wants to come up and share their story, please say your name and address for the record, please.
Hi, Mr. Chair. My name is Rosemary Frizzell, members of the committee. I'm a neighbor. I live at 2440 34th Ave. And I just want to say that the reason that I was supporting the neighborhood group and the efforts on the community part to appeal this was that the process got a bit ahead of us, and we didn't have opportunities earlier on that we were quite able to take advantage of. So we appreciate having this chance now. We're in support of development in the neighborhood in general, or I am. I'm an early childhood mental health provider, though, and I'm very concerned about safety of kids. So given the fact that we now are going to have 2 child cares across the street from each other in an area that already has a lot of congestion, I don't really care about parking per se. I care about what parking's impact is on safety of pedestrians and bicyclists, and particularly children, now that we're going to have, over 250, like Mike said, almost an elementary school on this corner in a street that's not really designed for it. So the reason that I wanted to come here and have this chance to talk to you was to impress upon you our concern that the city really needs to respond with appropriate infrastructure to support the development. So that's the main point I wanted to make, and thank you for your time.
Thank you. Also, I'd like to recognize Councilmember Andrew Johnson. Thanks so much for coming to the committee. Anyone else interested in speaking?
Hello, good morning. My name is Sheila Hagen, and I live directly, practically across the street from where the new daycare is. And my alley shares with the current daycare, and I know there's not really a connection between the current and the new one. They're different buildings, different businesses, but the current one, there is traffic in the alley, and it just is, because it's, and so almost daily I am, between myself and my daughter who drives, we're going to pull into our alley, and there's cars in the alley. Now this is from the other business, I realize that, But I really am concerned about what's going to happen in that whole area, being that there's going to be more cars. And it sounds like you're only going to have 2 spaces for drop-off on the street. Is that what was said a few minutes ago?
That's what I see in the picture.
I mean, 2 spaces for 140 kids, the families of 140 kids, does not make a lot of sense to me. And I know that one of the things we would like to be thought about is that there would not be drop-off traffic going into that parking lot, onto the alley, that the drop-offs stay on the street, and that somehow maybe you're going to have to increase the number of drop-off spots than on the street, because of 2 spaces does not make sense to me. So please consider fixing that somehow. But I am concerned about safety more than anything. I mean, right now there's a yoga center and a coffee shop within a block, in the next block, and that's a lot of traffic from those businesses. And so all the businesses together create a situation of a lot of traffic and not very safe coming out of the alley, crossing certain intersections. So we need some attention there. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good morning. I'm Roger Howley. I live at 2440 34th Avenue South. And I want to just jump on and reiterate that we are, as a neighborhood, and myself are concerned more about traffic than about parking. And the 2 blocks are very busy with a restaurant, a yoga center, a Nice Ride bike hub, the bus route. And, you know, that 25th Street is a municipal state aid road, and it continues to get busy. And our goal is to see how we can create a safer street. And we support very much the daycare moving in. But we would ask that we're not opposed to granting the parking variance. But we would ask in exchange that the parking lot behind the building not be used for drop-off. So it would be used by people coming with longer-term business at the daycare, such as coming to enroll at the school. It would be used by the staff van that the center would have. It would be used as a parking lot, but not for that drop-off. And if there are something like 50 of the 150 kids being dropped off between 7 and 9 a.m., that 12-foot alley will be quite a dangerous place with people maneuvering. And what we find at the daycare across the street is that they're using other people's driveways to maneuver. And so again, we would like to propose to drop the requirement for asking for more parking, but to ask for the parking lot to be signed as a area with that's not for drop-off. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else interested in speaking? Anyone else like to speak?
Yeah, I'll take them. Like one more comment about this site and the parking as I'm looking at it.
Can you come into the mic?
No, sorry.
No problem.
With the parking as she's showing on here is drop-off parking. I was just kind of looking at trying to figure out whether or not there was actually a bus stop sign on that corner in that area. And I think a lot of the concern is that you've got 2 businesses directly across the street from each other. Both businesses have people lined up on both sides of the street, so the cars are getting kind of narrow there. Well, if you add additional parking stalls there or just drop-off spots, that's going to open up that whole intersection and corner and prevent injury, hopefully, to the kids or anything else or any issues on that street. So maybe it's something to look at in the future, that they would even require the other location across to the other side of the road to do the same that these guys would with a drop-off site. So just wanted to add that. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else interested in speaking? Oh, no, you already had a chance to speak. Is there specific things?
Okay. I just want to address their concern about safety.
I'm not seeing any questions from any of the council members, so thank you. All right, not seeing anyone else, I will now close the public hearing. Councilmember Gordon?
Thank you very much. This is in Ward 2, so I thought maybe I could kind of lead up the motion. Would like to speak to it a little bit. I really appreciate everybody got involved and working together. My theory behind this was maybe that there is some conditions we could add, but I'm not supportive of granting the appeal. I think that the parking lot is large enough and that the Planning Commission got it right, and I would be concerned about losing space from the playground. And I even think what we're seeing here is a larger concern about this very popular neighborhood with these very popular businesses nearby. And this isn't the first time I've heard concerns about traffic and the need for traffic calming and parking space. And I really appreciate those concerns. And I think this will hopefully be motivating us to take a bigger look. I know that there was a neighborhood community meeting Tuesday evening where they also talked about it, so that the neighborhood organization is involved too. And based on that, I started some discussions. We already reached out to Met Transit about relocating the bus stop, and they're interested in that. And it turns out, for those people who don't know this area, this is an old streetcar line actually, and so this ended up having a commercial node from back in the 50s and 60s, and it stayed thriving a commercial node even though we tried to rezone it and look at it as residential and thought that might happen there, and it's very popular right now, and so it still has a bus route. And there's actually two bus stops as it turns a corner, and Met Transit is interested in maybe consolidating that, and that could serve the community and it could open an area up here. I also did exchange emails with the business owner who seems interested in requesting and applying for maybe more 15-minute parking drop-off spaces right around the building along the property, which I think would really help. And I'm going to try to talk to Public Works about clarifying where you can actually park near an alley. I don't know if you know, but we have rules about parking by an alley, but we don't sign them very often. A lot of times people park very close to the alley. So we're going to try to add some signage there. Those are some of the things I think we can do outside of conditions. As I make my motion to deny this appeal, I'll also just say I'm not ruling out possibly coming back at the council meeting and seeing if there is some condition that we might add. I'm a little unclear about the alley problems and what it actually means. There are some instances where we put a sign requiring somebody to say right turn only as you're coming out of that. So if we don't want the cars going down the alley and using that area to turn around, and we could specify that, but that might not really be the best idea. So I need to talk more with some of the nearby neighbors who actually are all old friends of mine. It's great to see you again, and thanks for coming and seeing me at work. I appreciate your interest in this. And so I plan on reaching out to the business owner, to Public Works staff and planning staff, and to the community members between now and Friday to see if there might be another condition or how other ways we can address this. But I'll move to deny the appeal right now and don't have a condition ready to offer at this time.
Thank you. Not seeing any other discussion. Councilmember Gordon's motion is before us. Does anyone have any discussion? Otherwise, all those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed say no. The ayes have it, and the motion carries. Item number 2 is an appeal submitted by Ellen Schmitz regarding the City Planning Commission's approval of a variance to reduce the minimum parking requirement from 30 spaces to 4 spaces for the property located at 4012 and 4016 Minnehaha Avenue. And we'll begin with the staff presentation.
Good morning, Chair Schrader and committee members. This might be a familiar presentation, so I'll go over it quickly. This is another Tierra and Cantata site at 4012, 4016 Minnehaha. On March 11th, 2019, the Planning Commission approved applications at the site to construct a new 3-story commercial building that would be used as a child care center. An appeal was filed regarding the parking variance that was approved by the Planning Commission to reduce the minimum parking requirement from 30 spaces to 4 spaces. This site is located just south of 40th along Minnehaha in a commercial area and has C1 zoning. The existing site contains its 2 parcels. One has a single-family home and one is a vacant lot that's been used as a community garden. As you can see from the site plan here, the applicant is proposing 4 parking spaces off of the alley, Initially, they had proposed additional parking off the alley for pickup and drop-off. Staff had some serious concerns about that since the alley is shared with primarily single-family homes to the west, and advised the applicant to make that parking for employees only. And there were conversations with Public Works that there is street parking on Minnehaha Avenue, which makes it a candidate for having on-street drop-off locations, similar to the last presentation that you saw. And so the applicant was intending to request 2 parking spaces. A condition of approval at the Planning Commission meeting was that the applicant requests 4 drop-off spaces along Minnehaha. Similar to Councilmember Gordon's point, the condition was that the applicant requests that. They haven't made that request yet. We haven't kind of hashed out those details with Public Works, but this is going through PDR and will be evaluated there. So the parking requirement for a child care center is 1 space per 500 square feet of gross floor area plus 2 drop-off spaces. And that's mostly understood to be for serving staff, that the parking lot would be for more of those long-term uses like staff. And so CPED staff recommended a condition of approval that the 4-space parking lot at the rear be used only for staff, not for drop-off, and that they provide a sign to that intent, and then that the drop-off locations along the street be provided for the pickup and drop-off from parents. In addition, that this site is incredibly well served by public transit. It's within walking distance of a light rail stop, and it's along 3 major bus routes. It also has excellent access to bicycle facilities, and the applicant has indicated that many of the staff that will serve this location are local and are likely to take public transit to and from work. In addition, the applicant, I can go back to the site plan here. The applicant owns the site at 4008 Minnehaha Avenue, which is a commercial building. It's currently used as a retail space, but eventually that retail tenant will be moving out, and it will serve as the administrative offices for Tierra and Cantata, and that space does have a garage and some other paved area that could potentially be used for staff if the 4 spaces on the site in question were not sufficient for the staff parking. And I am happy to stand for questions.
Thank you. I'm not seeing any questions. No, thanks. At this point, I'll open up the hearing, and I'll first give the appellant the opportunity to speak to the committee. Would the appellant or the representative like to come speak? Nope, Ellen Schmidt in a second. Oh, excuse me. Yes, sorry.
And if it's okay to approach, we don't have the technology hookup, so we have some PowerPoints evidencing our appeal, if that's okay to approach to hand out.
Sure, if you can give it to the clerk, you also have an option. You can put it on the projector there if you want it on the screens.
We don't have that technology
No, I mean,
with us, so.
You can place the piece of paper on that projector right there if you want to do it, just to give you options.
You have the technology. Okay. Perfect. Well, you know what? I'm going to hand this out anyway, just because I'm not technically savvy. Okay. So I want to start, I'm representing the group of folks within the neighborhood around the area that's proposed for development by Tierra and Cantata. We have some other neighbors here as well. A lot of folks have submitted their concerns via email. And I want to clarify first and foremost, I've seen some of the comments that some of the supporters of the site have put out there. We are absolutely not opposed to a daycare being there. We think that's a fantastic idea. What we are concerned about is the size of the daycare that's being proposed. And the fact that the size of the daycare is why we have the concern today with the parking constraint. As the planning coordinator stated, sorry, don't know your title, I apologize. Lindsay stated, the requirement for a building this size is 300 parking spaces, or 30 parking spaces for a building this size. We have also heard that they are putting forth or asserting that their staff will be taking transit. Well, I question that only in the fact that their staff must already have been hired and have committed to taking Metro Transit. or you are mandating that, which I don't believe you can legally mandate. So that concerns me, because when you have a building of that size to accommodate 260 children, you are going to need about 50 staff, if at the minimum, to support that type of a daycare center. So to say that 4 parking spots is sufficient is what we are questioning. The one thing I wanted to bring up too is the primary concern are the 2 drop-off spaces to be provided in the, well, now 4 that's being proposed in the right-of-way on Minnehaha Avenue. And I want to bring up the comment around Vision Zero, Safe Streets for Everyone. That is one of the initiatives of the city to make sure that everybody is safe in how they come and go in the buildings, along the streets, and the right-of-way. Because we have on Minnehaha Avenue that wonderful bike road for all of our bicyclists that can safely travel as safely as possible down Minnehaha Avenue, the concern is the right-of-way and safety for them as well. And I did not see in the proposal, and maybe if Lindsay, you might have it and I just didn't see it, a request for a variance on the right-of-way for that bike path. I didn't see that there was a request, and so if you look on page, I'm sorry, these aren't numbered, but bike statutes. Partway through, you'll see the bike statute on the, it's Minnesota Statute 169:18. When crossing a bike lane to motor vehicles may only do so when safe, yielding right away. So was there a variance requested or required to ensure that that bike lane was not infringed on, as well as making sure that there was enough that there was parking spots for drop-off and pickup. So ultimately, our concern is the right-of-way and safety issues for all pedestrians, bikers, parents, and children trying to access the site. The other piece of that comes into mind is the distance between the intersection of 40th Street and Minnehaha Avenue and where this site is. And it is not, and I didn't measure it, I apologize, but it is not a large distance between that intersection and where the building is. For an example, if you look in the back here, there are some pictures here of the parking situation we have now in our neighborhood. Based on the new development, the new restaurants, new businesses that have come in, 40th Street is constantly backed up. Minnehaha Avenue is constantly backed up. And if you look on the very last page, you can see these are current pictures taken just a few days ago. There's a FedEx truck sitting right in the bike lane to deliver. Now, I understand that the question is, the proposal put forth is to do 4 drop-off spots. But how does that impact then everyone else who has to relocate to find parking, right? They're going to be coming down all the other streets to park, impacting the residents, impacting the other businesses. And I know we live in a city, I understand that. But that is the reality of what we are concerned about. I also would like to call out the comparison that's been made between this site proposed and the other sites. If you look on page, sorry again, not sure of the page, but here's the picture. Here's a picture of the Tierra Encantada in Eagan. It is in a strip mall. It has plenty of parking. It's easy access in and out of the building for any of the people who would like to bring their children there. Tierra Encantada Bryant, which is only 3.5 miles away from the proposed Hiawatha site, does have, it does seem to be on a little more busier street, but you can see around the corner there is parking in the back. So they have off-street parking there. And if you look at Tierra Encantada Wyndham, this is the one that we were told in the hearing originally, was in northeast Minneapolis by the chief operating officer, which is in fact, it's in South Minneapolis, in my old neighborhood. And as you can see, it is a current building, again, another current building that is a 2-story. Looks like it's maybe was one of our beautiful original elementary schools from back in the day. That has plenty of parking around half of the block that is dedicated just to that site, and I believe it also has off-site parking. So really the concern we have is this proposed site for Minnehaha Avenue, which is a small parcel, two parcels that are small and narrow. Previous meeting, we heard one of the committee members express their concern that the whole reason for this variance was because the site was too small for the plan that's being put forth to build. So this is really an illustration of how small a space is being utilized to build such a large building to accommodate 260 children and only allow for 4 drop-off spots. And we heard the previous neighborhood express their concerns for a lesser, smaller size building. I can't imagine that this can be overlooked for a building proposed to be 3 stories to accommodate 260 children, but only allow for 4 drop-off spots. The requirement of the state code is 30 spots. And if the fact that matter that the 30 spots is why they need a variance because they want to build in such a small lot, that has to be considered. And the neighborhood impact must be considered. I have been living in this neighborhood for 25 years. My husband's lived in this neighborhood for 38 years. We've seen lots of things come and go, and we've seen the beautiful Minneapolis Mile be developed, and we've been very happy about all of the developments. Again, we are not against a daycare going into this spot. We want to be very considerate of our neighbors as well, but we would really be remiss in our neighborhood if we did not look at this seriously to say, what is the real impact of putting that much of a space building in this small of space? Can we really say that there won't be upwards of 200 vehicles coming and going on a snowy day like today? Everybody's going to take public transportation to get their kids to daycare. Everybody's going to take public transportation to get to work. We can't say that that's a true statement. So we have to work in the facts that we have, and the facts that we have is the reason they need a variance is because they're building too big of a building for that small of a lot.
Okay, thank you. Next, I'd like to give the applicant the opportunity to address the committee. Would the project applicant or representative like to come speak?
Hi again.
If you could just restate your name and address again.
Yep. My name is Karina Zumba. I'm the Chief Operating Officer for Darren Gonzaga. I know some of these items were already addressed with the Seward variance, so I'm going to get to try to address the specific points that were brought up right now. To address the concern about drop-offs, we're seeking a limited time parking zone to be installed along our property line, approximately 120 feet. Limited parking only during drop-off pickup hours on weekdays. While it might seem like it won't be chaotic, we assure you it will not be. We encourage everyone to visit the mentioned Wyndham location during drop-off and pickup time to get an understanding of timing. If anyone has been to our location, they will have seen how calm those times are. After observing drop-off pickup at our locations, we have found that the average time it takes from when a parent walks in the door to when they leave is approximately 2 minutes and 40 seconds. This includes parents with 1 or 2 children. Further, anywhere between 25 and 40% of our families have more than 1 child in our program. Our Bryan location, for example, has 37 families with more than 1 child, so 30%. In 2018, U.S. demographics showed that almost 60% of our families had 2 or more children, so we're confident that this will continue to hold through. So instead of having the 260 cars, it's more likely 170 cars over 3 hours. The average parallel parking space is approximately 18 to 20 feet long. With us having 120 feet, we'll have 6 designated limited time parking spaces for drop-off. That means we can accommodate on our sole property the drop-off and pickup of over 400 children in those 6 spaces based on the average time over 3 hours, the 6:30 a.m., 9:30 a.m. period. This doesn't take into account we have a very large population of parents that walk or bike their children to our center. So we'll be able to accommodate over 400 drop-offs when we only need to accommodate about 170, providing more than enough space for a facility while ensuring we are impacting neighborhood homes and businesses during their most active times on weeknights and weekends. As we have shared previously, there's a drastic shortage of quality childcare options in Minneapolis, with even more limited options for sites for childcare to go. To further evidence this point, one of the neighbors originally opposed to the project, after reaching out to us to discuss it, changed her opinion and then asked about childcare for her own child. This site needs a playground, and the proposed site plan is the best possible layout to manage providing outdoor space for children while keeping few designated parking spaces. Further, this use is ideal for this area and is the most compatible for residential. It's closed on evenings and weekends and will be a possible impact for the community.
Thank you. Not seeing any questions from here. I'd now like to open up the hearing to the other members of the public who'd like to speak. You'll have 2 minutes, and that time will be kept on the clock next to the clerk. Anybody interested in speaking? And if you can say your name and address for the record.
Good morning. My name is Heather Pressler. I live at 3413 East 40th. And I would just like to comment on the safety. I'm a year-round biker. I travel Minnehaha almost daily at high traffic times. A few blocks away from the site is another Spanish immersion daycare that has already been mentioned. 2 times I have been hit by either car doors or parents swerving out to get into traffic. Both times landed me in the hospital, and that does not include the close calls I've had. I'm a very, very conscious biker. I have lights that flash. I wear helmets and pads, and I'm very diligent about being a responsible motor vehicle driver. So when you say that it's not going to impact a very busy bike lane, I think that that's false. I can show you my hospital bills to prove it. So I think that when you talk about the public right-of-way and the traffic, and when you look at the other businesses that get FedEx and UPS deliveries on a regular basis and shipping, that does in fact impact the bike lane. It does impact then having to go into lines of traffic, especially at peak times when parents are dropping and picking off their children. Thank you.
Thank you. Would anyone else like to speak?
Yes, please. Hi, my name is Molly OBoyle. I live at 3953 36th Avenue South. I look out my front window, and there will be the daycare. My concern's not just about the parking, but about the increased traffic that the parking fiasco or traffic jams there with the drop-off and pickup will create for my street. We have met with Andrew a couple times already, as well as the Public Works Department, to discuss the amount of traffic we have on 36th Avenue, as well as the level of safety with that traffic. We already have an increased traffic amount coming on our street. People use it as a throughway to avoid the traffic on Minnehaha currently. We have people speeding exponentially, running red lights, running stop signs all the time. Multiple accidents I've witnessed on the corner of 36th Avenue and 40th Street in the 15 years I've lived there. My big concern is that at best, we're going to have 260 minutes of drop off in the morning and pick up in the afternoon. We're going to have an increase in frustrated drivers on Minnehaha, trying to avoid that going into 36th Avenue, which more frustrated drivers on an already busy street is a recipe for disaster.
Okay. Thank you.
Hello, Chairman. My name is Joel Carter. I live at 4033 Snelling Avenue, which is directly across the alley from the proposed site. And again, I want to emphasize I'm in favor of development. You know, anyone investing in the neighborhood is a good thing. But there are safety issues and congestion issues that come from not having adequate off-street parking. I think there's approximately 10 businesses on that block or immediately north of the intersection with 40th Street. So there's already a lot of traffic, a lot of people parking on the street. And the referred to Yarden, which is like 2 blocks north on Minnehaha, a one-story building with approximately 60 to 65 spots available for children. This is 260. It's actually 4 times the size. And really, you're not going to have any increased area to drop off children in front. And, you know, by my arithmetic, it would be like 4 hours it would take if everybody was able to get their kid in and out in like 5 minutes. So a lot of congestion. Minnehaha used to be a 4-lane street. You would have had a left lane to get by any congestion, but of course, since it's been reconfigured with the bike lanes and so forth, it's just 2 lanes. And then the 4 spots in the alley, there was another variance approved allowing them to back out into the alley to access those slots. And, you know, backing out with small children, a real safety hazard, and all of these would be ameliorated by having an adequate parking lot. Again, it's like 30 slots. You know, maybe it doesn't need to be that many, but 30 slots, maybe you have a place to drive without having to back up, and, you know, just generally having sufficient for the staff of a facility that size. Thanks.
Thank you. Anyone else interested in speaking?
Again, my name is Sheila Hagen. I live at 2455 34th Avenue. I did not know this was on the agenda, and obviously these 2 issues are connected. And I just want to put a word in as a citizen of Minneapolis, who also, of course, uses Minnehaha Avenue, that it sounds like it's making a situation more difficult, and I would strongly encourage you to make the changes. I don't know all the details of their situation at Minnehaha, but to be more parking at that space on Minnehaha Avenue so that they can have the daycare, which is a necessary business, but let's make it safe for everybody who's traveling along Minnehaha Avenue. And I want to acknowledge the biker who spoke. I would like them to be safe.
Thank you. Anyone else interested in speaking? Hello.
Hello. Hi, I'm Ed Colori. I live at 3040 46th Avenue South, and I have a child that attends Hardin, but not today. So I'm familiar with Minnehaha Avenue and daycares and the congestion that can cause from that perspective. And with this project here, I'm not concerned. I think it's going to be fine the way it is. As far as staff goes, what I see from just down the block is lots of people do take transit. A lot of people carpool in large carpools of cars because they tend to, some of the people who are parts of the daycare, they live together or live very close to each other. And just the financial realities of working at a daycare is a lot of people work for daycares do not own cars. So I think that's one of the reasons that there's less parking problems because of that. As far as congestion on Minnehaha goes, I see Minnehaha transforming into more of a commercial corridor and less of a thoroughfare, and I think that's a good thing. I think we want traffic to go slower. We want to get the speed of that street down as more and more businesses come in. I'd rather have the street be a destination than a thoroughfare, and this is one way we do that. So thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else interested in speaking? Anyone else? All right, seeing no one, the hearing is now closed. Is there any discussion? Okay, not seeing any. I will move to deny the appeal. We had a pretty thorough discussion at the Planning Commission, just to kind of fill in my colleagues, where we talked about the congestion, and that's where we added the extra, well, as talking among the commissioners to add the extra 2 spots for that very reason. Some of the other concern that wasn't brought up, because compared to the last appeal we just heard, this is in the middle of the block, and there was a kind of a thought of that might be a little more bunched up. Not seeing any questions on that. All those in favor, say aye. Aye. All those opposed?
I'm not sure if Andrew wants.
Okay. All right, the ayes have it, and the motion carries. Councilmember Johnson.
Mr. Chair, thanks for having me at the committee. I just want to reiterate to residents, I was here today to observe, and I also know we have another project coming up that I will be speaking on, but I just want to thank the residents for coming out. I as well have concerns with safety in terms of traffic just on Minnehaha Avenue, and so I want to, very similar to Councilmember Gordon, reiterate my interest in working and continuing to work with residents and Public Works on signage, on ways to calm the traffic on the street, as well as when we have a number of commercial businesses already on a block, trying to look at the balance of and the different needs that are there that exist. I know Minnehaha Avenue has a number of different businesses. I know someone mentioned Minnehaha Mile. We're so fortunate that we've got all these great antique and secondhand shops on Minnehaha Avenue. We also have a lot of dance studios on Minnehaha Avenue, which draw in sometimes well over 100 different customers at a single time. And so there's always a parking constraint there as well. And so constantly looking at that and figuring out how can we do better is something beyond this quasi-judicial matter that I'm very interested in and continue to work with folks on, because it's I think there's a lot of opportunity out there broadly, and I think there's opportunity on Minnehaha Avenue as well.
Thanks so much. We're going to, finally, we'll take up our number 5, which is a consideration of an appeal submitted by Faegre Baker Daniels regarding the decision of the Planning Commission to deny a conditional use permit and a site plan review for a project at 4757 Hiawatha Avenue. The committee held a hearing on this item back in January and is now coming back to us with several revisions to the plans. And we'll begin with the staff presentation.
Thank you very much. So the subject property is at 4757 Hiawatha Avenue. The applicant is now proposing a mixed-use building with a commercial retail space of approximately just under 1,400 square feet, and has reduced the overall quantity of dwelling units from 85 to 75. On December 3rd, 2018, the City Planning Commission denied 2 of the 3 requested land use applications to allow for the proposed project to move forward: a conditional use permit to increase the maximum height in the shoreline overlay, and a site plan review. The variance to of the pedestrian-oriented overlay standards was granted by the Planning Commission, so that's not an application before you today. The applicant appealed the decision, and we've been before committee, as you mentioned earlier, Councilmember Schrader, and staff has now highlighted some significant changes to the proposed project after coordination with the neighborhood association. That being said, staff was in receipt of 2 documents from the neighborhood association this week. One was a letter from the Longfellow Community Council Board recommending 4 stories instead of 6 stories. And then there was also some poll results from community meetings that were held. As mentioned, the land use is proposed to change. Originally, it was 85 rental dwelling units, and now they're proposing the mixed-use building with 75 dwelling units, 3 of which would be condominiums, and they would be located on the 6th floor. Here's a side-by-side comparison of what was before the City Planning Commission and then what is being proposed today. So some significant changes to the building height overall. Just as note, staff recommended approval of the conditional use permit to increase the height to 5 stories, 70 feet to the roof deck, and to 85 feet to the top of the elevator. As you can see in this previous proposal, that 6th floor was recessed only where the property line jogged, essentially along Hiawatha Avenue, whereas now the 6th floor is recessed significantly along both corners of the street, so Nawataha Boulevard and also Hiawatha Avenue. Staff believes that the design has improved significantly as well, and we're recommending approval. We gave you an updated staff report for the previous Zoning and Planning Committee for that conditional use permit to increase height. Staff identified a number of areas also where alternative compliance would be required for the proposed project. In some cases, we're recommending granting that alternative compliance, and in some cases, we're not. And where not, we have updated our recommendations. So staff is before you today to answer any additional questions, but generally speaking, is in support of this proposed project with a few minor modifications.
Thank you. Just wanted to see if there's any questions.
Yep, Mr. Chair, the committee lacks a quorum currently, so everything that Ms. Sether has recited has been in your packets and in the record that you've already been privy to. It's largely been a summary, but I would suggest at this point that the committee, before proceeding further, wait for a quorum.
Oh, thanks. It should be on the way. Thank you for your patience.
Absolutely.
Okay, I thought he was a faster walker than so. Thank you very much. Well, I think for this, we were just going to move the staff recommendation. So I wanted to see if there's any questions for staff. All right, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Next, I'd like to just actually move the staff recommendation, which is to grant the appeal and thereby approving the conditional use permit, site plan review, and subject to the outlined conditions to adopt the revised staff findings. Councilmember Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I just wanted to speak on this for a moment because it was kind of an unusual process in that the committee had a recommendation on this, and then it came to the full council, and the recommendation originally was to deny the original proposal. And the applicant reached out and said, hey, we'd really like to make this work and be responsive to the committee, to the Planning Commission, and to the comments that we heard in the community. And so we asked for a delay. I asked for a delay at full council and for this committee to grant the time to the applicants to make some substantial revisions, and also that there was enough time to go back out to the community and to circle back up and get feedback. And so kudos to, first off, thank you to the committee for allowing that extra time here, and to the applicants as well, because what I think we have before us is a substantially improved design and responsiveness to those concerns as well. This is a tough space because it's transit oriented. It's right by the light rail station, but it's also along the creek and the park, and it has impact within the Shoreland Overlay District as well in that regard. And I think just speaking to how this revised proposal has been received by the community as well, there was a community meeting. They formally did surveys for those in attendance, and a majority said yes to this project with no conditions. There were a number of other yeses with various opinions on, add some more parking, or add more condos in here for sale, or change the color of the outside exterior, those sort of comments. And only one person at that community meeting said no, that they don't want to see this move forward. So I think, it's been something that we were able to take back and get that feedback from the community, send out notice, put out notice online, get people showing up. And I really want to thank the applicants as well for the responsiveness on this. I think the process worked, and we have a better project as a result of that today.
Thank you. Is there any further discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor of adopting the staff recommendation, say aye. Aye. All those opposed, say no. The ayes have it, and the motion carries. Finally, the last item on our agenda is an update on the tobacco shop study the City Council initiated last year, and I'll invite staff to give a presentation.
Good morning again, Councilmember Schrader and committee members. So I'm going to give a brief overview of the tobacco study that has been undertaken. Staff was authorized to complete a study as part of the moratorium, and in that included a requirement for an update, so this is that update. There was a tobacco shop moratorium that took effect August 31st of last year, and that was introduced by Councilmember Cano in reaction to the menthol tobacco sales restriction that went into effect at the beginning of that month, but that had been adopted a year previous. Since the menthol tobacco sales restriction was related to the flavored tobacco sales restriction and was an update to that and limited the sale of menthol tobacco from kind of anyone who had a tobacco license to tobacco only product shops and liquor stores. And since that went into effect, CPED specifically saw a large increase in the number of tobacco product shops. So when the menthol sales restriction was put into effect, there were 25 tobacco-only product shops, and as of today, there are 52. So, more than doubled the number of these specific tobacco product shops. On the other hand, it's worth noting that in 2016, menthol tobacco was able to be sold in 354 retail establishments, and now today, between the tobacco shops, though they have increased, and the liquor stores, menthol tobacco is only available to be sold in 82 locations. So one thing that we saw as a result of this sales restriction was that there were land use applications coming to CPED staff as requests for establishing these new tobacco product shops. A lot of what we saw was convenience stores that were interested in splitting their store down the middle to create a separate tobacco-only section and then to retain their convenience store on the other side. And because tobacco shops are only allowed in downtown districts and commercial districts higher than C1, that resulted in a lot of requests for rezoning. And in addition, because of the orientation of some of these buildings, it also required conditional use permits to establish a shopping center when the parking of the building was located between the building and the street. So we, over that kind of year where this was happening, we saw 12 land use application requests, and that's above and beyond all the building permits that were approved and tobacco licenses that were approved. So of the 12 convenience stores that applied to split, 8 of those were approved, which was based on underlying land use policy, and 4 of those were denied. And really, CPED staff was having to rely on underlying land use policy, which is obviously not specific to tobacco uses, to kind of make these decisions that were coming about as part of the menthol sales restriction. So kind of in that vein, we are kind of looking at some policy options that would potentially give a better framework to these decisions that would not make these decisions completely reliant on the underlying zoning district. Because as we move into this new phase of Minneapolis 2040 and changes to the zoning code, that could change, where tobacco shops are not allowed. And so staff has put together some policy options that would give a little bit more clarity around where tobacco shops would be permitted in the city of Minneapolis. As part of this, we have a tobacco study work group that's been created, which has representatives from the small business team, business licensing, and the health department. And one undertaking that the small business team has done is conducting surveys with convenience store owners. And some of the themes from those visits with stores included that, for some stores, menthol tobacco was a significant portion of their revenue, and so they have seen financial loss. They've seen loss of customers and loss of employees. And a lot of those stores, whether they've taken steps to or not, are interested in the possibility of either splitting their store to create a new tobacco product shop, or what we've also seen is stores that were convenience stores getting rid of all the other products and just becoming a tobacco shop, so not selling anything except tobacco if the zoning allows it. There were also themes of unfairness and then attempts to kind of add in new products into these stores, but then concern that concern about whether further investment in their stores would be worthwhile in this new environment. Blue Cross and Blue Shield in Minnesota and Clearway, Minnesota conducted advertising assessments, and so we were able to review a couple of case studies that they did, and so that was looking at internal and external advertising both before and after the menthol restriction went into place. This is not a scientific study, this is just a couple of case studies, and this is something that we'll investigate further as we put together the final report and recommendation. But what was found was that in most cases there was more tobacco advertising total and more menthol tobacco advertising after the menthol sales ban went into effect. And some of that had to do with these new stores wanting, the newly created stores wanting to advertise that they are able to sell menthol. So basically staff has been evaluating a couple of these other impacts of the study, and as one of those pieces, we have been evaluating potential policy options that might help uphold the original intent of the menthol ordinance, which my understanding is that the original intent was to restrict access to menthol tobacco, especially in places where youth might be frequenting. And so as part of this presentation, we're looking for feedback and direction from the committee on, your interest in different policy options or how to kind of frame the rest of this process as we're putting together final recommendations. And then I do have a note here that we are still in the early phases of just looking at what options are out there, and so there may be potential legal considerations, and there are a lot of specifics that would have to be worked out if any of these were to kind of come to fruition. So one option that we had explored was extending the menthol sales restriction to include liquor stores. Liquor stores can have tobacco licenses, and they can sell menthol tobacco. This would impact all liquor stores that currently have tobacco licenses and would further restrict menthol. However, because of how zoning is distributed in the city, it would likely to reduce menthol access more in North Minneapolis that has less of the higher commercial zoning that would allow tobacco product shops. And so this was something that was raised as part of those interviews with small businesses about fairness and distribution of tobacco shops throughout the city and kind of making a consistent policy. Another option was to ban all sales of flavored and menthol tobacco products citywide. So this is would be a major change where there would be no exceptions, where you wouldn't be able to sell menthol or flavored tobacco in tobacco product shops. One reason the staff is bringing this forward is that the FDA has been considering, a rule to ban, I think it's the creation of menthol tobacco, and so as we're looking at maybe what the future of that environment might be, this would, potentially, if we went down this route, would make the city of Minneapolis be a little bit more in line with a potential future FDA rule. This would reduce overall access and likely would reduce youth initiation and likely would result in, the reduction of the number of tobacco product shops and vape shops. That would also impact liquor stores as well. This policy option is just something that, obviously wouldn't have much of an effect within the city limits, but just to encourage nearby municipalities in the state of Minnesota to adopt similar bans. One thing that was heard from some of the meetings with small businesses was that convenience stores on the edges of Minneapolis were most impacted by the menthol tobacco restriction, because folks would just go across the border to other convenience stores to get tobacco products elsewhere. Probably the kind of two main strategies that have been implemented by other jurisdictions is capping and spacing. So I'll talk about capping first. Capping is where you would set a number of tobacco shops that will be allowed in the city. This can be a citywide number, or it can be like per ward or per geographic area. The number could be more or less than the existing number of tobacco shops, and so it wouldn't result in revoking tobacco licenses. It would just result in the reduction over time as stores close of other reasons. So some of the benefits of capping is that it prevents an overall proliferation of tobacco product shops, where you wouldn't see more if the limit was the number that we have today, we wouldn't see an overall net increase. It would likely reduce the number of tobacco uses over time if we set the cap at lower than what it is today. There are some challenges with this. It does require additional staff time and staff analysis for each new tobacco shop. It can create winners and losers based on who already has these licenses or who got through the process before the moratorium took effect. It creates another level of complexity for small business owners. And a cap alone is not likely to influence the distribution of tobacco product shops throughout the city. So there could still be a concentration in certain areas. In addition, determining where and how we would implement the number would be something that we'd be looking for feedback from this committee on, because if it was by ward, some wards have a lot of commercial zoning and some do not. So that would really impact, how we would set that cap number. Spacing, on the other hand, is very similar to what we have for liquor stores. So that would require that new tobacco shops be located a certain distance away from each other, and then that distance would be something that we would be looking for feedback from the committee. This policy would deny new licenses to new tobacco shops that would be establishing if they were too close to other tobacco shops. Studies have shown that spacing can reduce retailer density, and that does impact smoking rates and youth initiation. So there's similar benefits and challenges between capping and spacing, where spacing does, reduce that retailer density, and it could reduce tobacco access and use over time. However, it also has there's additional staff time, staff analysis for each one. Similarly, it does kind of create sort of these monopolies based on where tobacco shops currently exist, because no others can establish within whatever the radius is, and it does create another level of complexity for small business owners. So these policy options that I presented today are to expand the sales restriction to include liquor stores, to ban all sales of flavored and menthol tobacco products citywide, to encourage similar bans in other nearby cities or the state, to cap the number of tobacco product shops or exclusive tobacco licenses, and to create a minimum spacing requirement between tobacco product shops. So the next steps for this tobacco shop moratorium is the moratorium was introduced on August 31st, 2018, and so it can run for up to a year unless the committee adopts changes in the meantime. Staff is looking for direction on the committee's interest in certain policy options, and we'll use that to create a final report. And the intent is to report back in a couple of months, in about June, to discuss the final recommendations from staff, and then that would give the course of the summer to introduce policy options and to introduce and decide upon policy options.
Great, thank you. Councilmember Gordon.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate the report and the options. I guess I have a couple of questions, and then I'm happy to provide some direction, at least from my perspective. Are there other cities that do spacing and capping of tobacco shops?
There are, yes. We have looked at similar cities elsewhere. So spacing, St. Paul, actually, Minnesota has spacing requirements. And there are other municipalities I don't have on my list here, but there have been studies into kind of this as a policy option and how it's been evaluated in other places.
Well, I tend to think that maybe the spacing, but maybe a combination of capping and spacing. In terms of our liquor stores, we don't actually have a cap. We're just relying on a spacing requirement from another liquor store and then also from some other land uses like schools. Is that correct?
I believe so. I think maybe Craig can speak to the how we do it.
Hi, Chair and committee members. I'm Craig Eliasman, business licenses. Yes, that's true with off-sale liquor establishment. There's a spacing requirement that they cannot be located within 2,000 feet of another off-sale establishment, and there's a spacing requirement from churches and school facilities.
One of the reasons why I think the spacing requirement might make some sense is because there's precedent. We've done it. We, I don't think, have been challenged legally in terms of the liquor store spacing requirements. It makes sense to people, and they'd have an understanding. I know there'd be negatives in terms of people who want to open new shops because it would be much harder to find a location where it would work. But I tend to think out of those options that spacing and capping, I'm a little less. I remember when we had a cap on the cab driver's license, and that was created a mess. So I'm not quite sold on that. So it'd be interesting to see what other cities have done and the success they've had in capping and spacing requirements. I do think we were fearful that we'd end up with a big concentration of people wanting to try these tobacco shops as we saw the number increasing, and so that without some spacing requirements, we could end up with a bunch of them all together. And maybe targeting certain populations. I know even right now there's quite a few around the university. So I would definitely be interested in pursuing that. There's another option that isn't on the list, and I don't know that you should study it, but I want to put it out there for us to think of. As we've done with liquor and as we've done with flavored tobacco and menthol tobacco, we might want to think about future things we might want to regulate as well. We may want to regulate all tobacco in a similar manner as we now regulate the off sale of all liquor or of flavored tobaccos to adult-only stores. I think that's something to think about. Also, there's a good chance that there'll be other substances that we're going to think are particularly dangerous or youth are vulnerable to. If marijuana ever becomes legal recreationally in the state, how are we going to regulate that? And will we have a model that we can go back to and think this might work? And so that's something I think that we, at least is in my mind as we're looking at this kind of thing, what makes sense and what doesn't make sense, and how can we do these things in a safe way. I also think, of course, we want to be influencing our neighbors to try to do the right thing or demonstrate that these things can work in terms of other jurisdictions. So I like that option. I think that's something to think about. I think this would be solved beautifully if we had a statewide solution. And so that's something I think we could keep thinking about having on our legislative agenda. And do we want to work towards that? And I know we do have partners in the legislature that are interested in this kind of thing. Maybe Minneapolis delegation members are themselves. So that's my 2 cents, or maybe that was 3 cents worth. I don't know if other folks want to weigh in.
I give you 4 cents on that. Councilmember Ellison.
Thank you for the presentation. I had a couple of questions. There was early on, you listed a couple of like adverse effects for small businesses, and I know that one of them was loss of revenue, and other was sort of like a commitment to remove their other products and just sell, tobacco, convert their store to tobacco. Were those things that we found were occurring in the study, or were those sort of anecdotes and/or commitments from the small businesses that we were talking to?
Sure. So the slide that I showed with kind of those kind of key bullet points was, and I can go back to that. That was from store visits, so that's kind of anecdotal from the stores. I think that there were some points in time where we were hoping we could gather more hard data from the stores, if some of them would maybe open up their books and show us kind of what has happened over time, and I don't think we've had luck with that strategy yet. However, some of these other things, as far as how these new tobacco shops have come about, that is data that we've been able to track through business licenses and land use applications and building permits. So, so we've been able to see some of these tobacco shops have been created through splitting these existing stores. And I think it's only maybe one or two that have been created from the store kind of converting entirely into a tobacco shop. But we are able to kind of show that, and that's something that will be discussed in the final report too.
Great, thank you. And I think I had one other question. Well, I guess I would be open to sort of a spacing requirement, as Councilmember Gordon mentioned, but I'd also sort of, and maybe this is not the setting, but I'd also would love to sort of get some feedback from our legal team on what it would mean to sort of restrict menthol altogether, or some of those things, just because you noted, I felt like the spacing requirement is where you noted particularly that would take up a lot of staff bandwidth, and I know that this council has a lot of asks of staff, and I wouldn't want that to be another thing that prevents us from being able to do more important things from the city, that we have staff tied up in constant sort of spacing situations. So,
I would share on that currently when these applications come forward and they have to go before Planning Commission, that's kind of a situation in which, it's an entire land use application process, and we've had 12 of those so far. So 12 out of, 12 out of I think 30 almost that have been created. I know that I don't know the full need for staff capacity when it comes to spacing for liquor stores, but I would expect that if we have a framework for where these can be established, it would be significantly less staff time spent on each application than what we're seeing, or what we were seeing before the moratorium went into effect, where there were coming through, maybe one or two applications on many Planning Commission agendas.
And then the last thing is just a comment, which is to say, I think it's really cool to have that information about, even though the number of individual tobacco shops doubled, plus that where menthol was sold was, went from being 300 some locations to 80 some. I think that's a big deal when it comes to being able to track the accessibility, and it's good to have the whole picture, because I could just sort of imagine we did this legislation and then the number of individual tobacco shops doubled, which is but per sort of your data, that's not the whole picture. So it was good to get that. So thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Gordon.
I just have a question about how long we can keep this moratorium going. Could we just make this permanent and say we're just going to rest for a while and keep thinking about this for a few decades, or is this going to be up really soon?
Well, my understanding is that moratoriums are authorized for a maximum of 1 year, and they can expire earlier if the council adopts some other options in the meantime. So I can also have Eric answer.
There it is right there, August 31st.
Right. Chair Schrader, Councilmember Gordon. So again, this discussion and this update is sort of what's been conceived as the halfway point of the moratorium update is exactly what a moratorium is intended to do. They're designed to be deployed. It's granted it's a heavy-handed tool, but they're designed to be deployed to respond to sort of unanticipated uses, new uses, things that might have some adverse effects or implications that were unanticipated, and they're designed to protect a planning process that is underway. And so that's exactly what Lindsay has recited here, is that this is a planning process that they've been involved with the staff team and examining this issue from a variety of angles so that we can develop a thoughtful policy response. And so in particular, we were just looking mainly for sort of your general inclination on the policy areas for a deeper dive. Obviously, none of those decisions will be made today, but so that this is exactly what the moratorium is intended to do. It's protecting this planning study and this process that's going on. It's a temporary freeze while that occurs, so that thoughtful policy can be developed.
So then, just to clarify, would one of the options legally open to us to say that we just want to freeze it where it is? We're going to cap it at 82, and that's that?
Mr. Chair Schrader, Councilmember Gordon, I would have concerns with that approach, but we are going to look at that and would be happy to discuss further.
I'm not necessarily advocating that, but I was just curious because we did talk about cap, and I think, as I said, spacing seemed a little more appealing to me than the cap idea. But thank you.
Thank you. Not seeing anything else, I'll weigh in myself. I mean, I will weigh in on the moratorium use. I think that it is a pretty heavy-handed tool, so I'd like to see that reserved for that, for very kind of particular uses. On this, I guess the feedback, the whole reason we did the kind of menthol ban is to stop or reduce the amount of smoking among youth, and I think zoning's one way, but not the most eloquent way to get at that policy. So I think the ban idea is much better one. I think in the meantime, encouraging our neighbors in other jurisdictions to also adopt similar things. I think hearing from all the options, spacing may be one of the ones that makes sense, just seeing other jurisdictions in our area that are also already using that. But I think just trying to look at what, I appreciate staff really looking at the intent of the original ordinance and where we're trying to get to and kind of getting to that while being as the least disruptive as possible. Not seeing anything else, I'm going to move to receive and file this update. All those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed say no. The ayes have it, and that motion carries. Seeing no further business before this committee, we are adjourned.